In a world where voices are silenced,
Please.
one man refuses to lie down.
It's about how hard you can get hit and keep moving forward. How much you can take and keep moving forward. That's how winning is done.
He's been punted not once,
40 years they've been trying.
not twice,
You couldn't fire somebody if they were horrible, doing a terrible job.
but 3 times.
You're fired.
He doesn't tell you what to think, but gives you something to think about. Welcome to the Bonafide Podcast with Luke Boner. And he's not
All right, here we go.
done
Hold your ears, folks.
yet.
It's showtime.
Well, g'day, folks. Welcome to episode 18, Bonafide with me, Luke Boner. And we're kicking off with the Man Cave very shortly with brother Adam McDonald, the general manager of All Bids. But look, a bit to talk about this episode. Dick Smith's Australian dream. We're going to talk about that, where he sees Australia going over the next 20, 30, 40 years, what he thinks of the government being re-elected, and why his home brand Dick Smith groceries were taken from the shelves and he had to shut the whole thing down. He said he could not compete with Aldi. We'll have a talk about that shortly. Also, you often hear about Facebook sperm donors, the underbelly of the fertility industry, and what happens when an Ancestry DNA kit reveals your dad is actually not your dad. We're going to talk to Amelia Oberhardt about all of that. But as I mentioned, the Man Cave. Now, we usually save this until the end of the show, but this episode, Adam's joining me right here, right now. Brother Adam McDonald, hello and welcome again.
G'day, Skip.
Stop listening to the AM dial, to the boring AM shows. Sick and tired of counting sheep, but they're talking that never flows. And stop apologizing for the things you've never done. Time is short, life at night. Oh, it's up to us to do a show called The Man Cave. Yeah, do a show with Adam. Thomas holds the Man Cave line. Toby Ann is a real stunt girl. And Larry Canning, golf expert. Michelle Bishop's on the phone. Every Friday morning, we'll tune into the show. It's enough to make Luke Boner believe that his ratings will take the lead. A show called Man Cave. Yeah.
Good to be back on number 18, ready to go.
Number 18, what are we doing?
Time flies when you're having fun, Skipper.
I know, and people sponsor this.
Do
Who would
they?
have thought? Well, they do this week. Shush. We're going to look at what it's worth, and we're going to go through some valuations. We'll look at some feedback that we've received
Yep.
because of previous Man Cave episodes, Adam. And I got a very special item in the mail, brother Adam, this week.
Right.
And I can't wait to surprise you. You have no idea. This is a surprise that's going to go out on the podcast for the first time, and I want your immediate reaction. Are you ready for that?
I'm ready.
Okay.
I am
now,
ready. I was born ready.
I'm not saying it's you were born, but at least you were ready. Can I just say this to you, brother Adam? You're looking fantastic today. You were wearing a beanie earlier on. Have you
I
still got
was.
it there within arm's reach? It looked like a West Tigers beanie.
No,
is it? Or was it
it's the
Hawthorn?
Triple M beanie.
Oh, did you steal? Did you get one of those? Did you?
I acquired it, we'll say.
Ah, okay. All right.
Yeah, I mean, Canberra's autumn is like Sydney's deepest, darkest winter.
How are you coping with it?
I'm okay with it. Once you get to Canberra, you buy a Kathmandu and a beanie, and you're fine. That's all you need. You need a puffy jacket and a beanie, and you're fine. You know, my hairline has receded down to my shoulders, so it's a challenge. But if I've got my beanie on, I'm fine.
I'll tell you what, that Kathmandu brand, it's everywhere.
It is, and it For good reason. Like
Unbelievable.
it is unbelievable. Every single person in Canberra wears one.
Yeah, but do you have to go Kathmandu? Can't you go down to Target and get something very similar?
They're not the same. They're not the same. Target will be full of synthetic fleece, and the Kathmandus are downfilled. They're unbelievable. I mean, I think I've got 3 now. I'm a proud Canberran.
That's enough. That's enough now. If Kathmandu want to sponsor the podcast, I'm
Yep.
happy to elaborate and
you go.
expand. But that's enough for Kathmandu. That is enough for Kathmandu right now.
There's other brands out there. There's other brands out there if they want to throw their hat in the ring too.
Yeah, you know what I'm like with brands. If they're not sponsoring me, they can get stuffed, okay?
Absolutely.
Talking of your specialty valuations, we had something unbelievable come to us from Marie. It is an original Flintstones poster. You've seen it, and people can see it on their screens if they go to our Facebook page. What do you make of this?
Look, this Flintstone poster is, it's one of your favourite things, which is ephemera. Anything made out of paper products are all called ephemera. Now, this is a really early one. It's original. The best thing about this one is it's got its maker and it's got a date down the side. The colours are still really vivid. The only problem is it's been folded, so there's a couple of creases in it, but you could easily iron them out. For the condition this thing is in, and the colours and the collectability, I'm in at maybe $1,000, maybe a little over. If you got that framed up, it'd be a wonderful thing. My father used to call me Barney as a boy. He used to think I looked like Barney Rubble. I couldn't see the resemblance. I thought I was more closer to Fred, but yeah, it's a great thing. It's a great piece of history. Flintstones ran for years and years, and the reruns ran for years and years, and it was part of people's childhood. You know, you get up before school, you eat your cornflakes, and you watch the Flintstones. I mean, that's what I did. So yeah, $1,000, $1,200, something up there. A very, very cool piece to hang on the wall.
Do you want to know a little bit of trivia? You would know this. There were 2 major cartoon factories at the time. One was Warner Brothers, and they did all the Bugs Bunny, and the other one was Hanna-Barbera, which did the Flintstones. And the voice of Warner Brothers, Bugs Bunny, Elmer Fudd, Tweety Bird, Sylvester, Foghorn Leghorn, all those characters was one voice, and it was Mel Blanc. And he was exclusively contracted to Warner Brothers, their main opposition being Hanna-Barbera. However, Warner Brothers lent Hanna-Barbera Mel Blanc for the Flintstones, and he was the voice of Barney Rubble.
Yeah, right. Hanna-Barbera, what else did they have? They had Huckleberry Hound. That was Hanna-Barbera.
Huckleberry Hound. They had everything that Warner Brothers didn't. There were only two cartoon factories.
Yeah, Warner Brothers were the juggernaut.
The Pigeon, the Wacky Races. Yeah.
Warner Brothers were the Dick Dastardly, all those for Hanna-Barbera, but Warner Brothers were the juggernaut, weren't they? They had all the big guns.
The Road Runner. They had Daffy Duck, not Donald. That was Disney. They had Tweety Bird, Sylvester, Foghorn Leghorn, as I said. They had all of that.
Wasn't Foghorn Leghorn a jerk? Like, if you think back, he was just an arsehole.
I said, boy, you're about as sharp as a bowling ball.
Yeah, he was an arsehole.
He was good. Now, the thing I liked about Foghorn Leghorn was that there was always a feud going on between him and the guard dog, and they were pretty even. One kicked one's ass and the other one kicked the other. The thing I didn't like was the Road Runner. He was a little prick.
He was.
That poor coyote. And yet the theme for the Road Runner, poor little Road Runner running down just trying to run down the road like he's having fun, not doing anyone any harm. Bull. He was a little prick. And I felt sorry for the coyote. I tell you, I would have loved shares in Acme because the coyote bought everything exclusively from Acme. If ever you want to find an anvil, just look in the middle of the road out there somewhere.
It was like the Audi brand, wasn't it? They just made everything. There was absolutely everything.
Acme anvils, Acme TNT,
TNT.
It was very, very good. But anyway, Alan Reed was Fred Flintstone, and the great Harvey Korman, who was a regular on the Carol Burnett show. He was also one of the voices. Elizabeth Taylor was in the movie, I think, with John Goodman. But anyway, there you are. And Gene Vanderpump was Pebbles. But there you go. Mel Blanc was the voice of Barney.
Don't you think when they made movies out of cartoons, They were always shit. Like that Flintstones, that was shit. That was shit. It wasn't a good movie.
Do you know what wouldn't stand up today is, do you remember it was either at the beginning or the end of the Flintstones, and he goes to put the saber-toothed tiger out, the cat out, and the cat gets back in and puts him out, and that's when he's banging on the door, Wilma! Well, these days you can't put your cat out at night.
No, because you've got to save the birds.
There's a curfew.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, there'd be a lot of things in those movies that you're not allowed to do anymore.
I thought it was great. Anyway, what's that poster worth?
$1,000, $1,200, up there.
No
it's a good
way.
Yeah, it's a good thing. I mean, the genre and the imagery is just fantastic. The colours are great. The condition, all it needs to be ironed out a little and put in a frame. But $1,000. I'd probably even go up to $1,500. Be very hard to find. The best thing about it, it's got all the makers and the dates down the side, so you know it's original.
I ended up getting that Larry Bird Magic Johnson picture frame that I saw online. I got it for my birthday a few weeks ago.
Yeah.
And it has a certificate of authenticity. It looks very homemade, guaranteeing me that I got a 1 in 500 set.
Yeah.
I don't know if it's real or not, but
you've got to be
makes me
careful.
smile.
Those COAs, those certificates, anyone can print a certificate and say, like I could say, Honest McDonald says this is real. It might not be real, but it's got a certificate. It's irrelevant. But so when you're buying that sort of stuff, you really got to investigate who has given the certificate. But anyway, if it's not real, it doesn't matter, Luke. It's on your wall. It's yours. Who cares? Who cares?
Yeah, I think I sent you a photo of it. It makes me smile because I loved the Magic Johnson, Larry Bird era. They saved the NBA in the 80s, if you ask me.
Absolutely.
Before Michael came along. But to have that up in my man cave has made me happy, Adam. So just leave me alone, okay?
That's right. That's what I said. It's yours now. Who cares?
Hey, some news that's happened since we last spoke. We mentioned last episode that we'd have an update on Senator Jacinta Price's move to the Liberal Party. We do. Obviously, Susan Lee was elected the first female leader of the federal Liberal Party. She defeated her rival candidate, Angus Taylor, of which Jacinta intended on being his deputy. I don't think it's the end of Jacinta Price. In fact, she said on Sky News during the week that she will work with Susan Lee. She wants to bring the Liberal Party back together, and it is fractured. It is an absolute basket case at the moment. I don't think I think it's going to take longer than 3 years, but a lot can happen. But she said on Sky News that she still has aspirations to one day being Prime Minister. And you know what? If the energy in her belly stays there, I think she's capable of anything.
I'd back her in for sure. Yep.
Some people have commented because I had my say on Channel 7 Sunrise. You might remember a couple of Fridays ago, supporting Jacinta Price because I think she'll be great for the party. And the feedback of an old colleague of mine, Jim Ball, who, by the way, is righter than Genghis Khan. But Jim Ball somehow got hold of it and put it up there, and there's pages and pages of feedback, and about 50% of the feedback are saying that I live in another world, I am demented, and that Jacinta Price is nothing but fractious. I think that she is the opposite. I think that she's sick of the division between Aboriginal Australia and non-Aboriginal Australia, and I think that she wants to bring it together. That's just my opinion.
Sure. Luke, I'll let you on a little secret. Being down here in Canberra, we're sort of neck deep in politics. I've got a client of mine who, I'm not going to mention any names, but he's a Liberal Party power broker. And I was chatting to him yesterday, and I'd said to him, how you going? How's the feeling? And he said, we absolutely got a new arsehole torn, and we have to rebuild from the bottom up. He said, I can't believe how big the divide was. And he said we made a huge mistake, and it's going to take a lot for us to rebuild.
Just let me tell you, the Susan Lee victory in the Liberal Party leadership, it wasn't a landslide, Adam, 45-49. And so that might be seen as divisive or divisive, because I think she'll be looking over her shoulder for a long time now. I don't think they're anywhere close to being settled.
No, I don't think they are either. I think it's a bit of a... Does it feel like it's a bit of a stopgap and just say, okay, we're going to throw this one up now, reset, and then have a good think about it? Because you can't you can't go in a space of a week and a half to say, well, this is the direction we went. Now, bang, we're going to go with this one. Like, surely there's got to be a bit of to and froing and thinking and test the waters and stuff. So, like, personally, I think a woman is the best man for the job. That's what I think.
I don't care whether you're male or female or trans or whatever. I think it just should be the best person for the job. I don't care what sex you are or aren't.
Yeah. I mean,
But if they're into, if the Liberal Party really does want to promote women, okay, Susan Lee was the choice. But how come back when there was the challenge for Malcolm Turnbull and his prime ministership, Julie Bishop, without a doubt, was the most popular contender, and she got hammered in the first ballot. Hammered.
Absolutely. This is a sausage party, I think.
They've got a lot of rebuilding to do, the Liberal Party.
They certainly do.
David Littleproud has been re-elected head of the Nationals. I've spoken to David, as you know, many, many times. I think he's a voice of reason. I think he has vision. And I think it's a good thing for him to continue. Remember, he took over the leadership of the Nationals after the Barnaby Joyce fiasco, because I thought Barnaby Joyce was a pretty good Nationals leader, except, I mean, he had an inappropriate relationship with his press secretary.
A couple of
they've now had two children. But Barnaby Joyce, in his electorate, is loved like a god.
He is,
the seat of New England. Anyway, it'll be interesting to watch. Hey, listen, another story that we touched on, Adam, last Man Cave, was people obsessed with going to concerts and filming and taking photographs and actually watching the whole concert through a phone and not actually watching who's on stage. And I mentioned this, but can I just bring it up again? Cold Chisel legend, guitarist and vocalist Ian Moss, has embarked on a huge crackdown. He wants no screens, just screams at his concerts. He's barred phones. Is he dreaming, or do you think he's got a point?
I mean, he's got a point. I don't think you can bar them. To me, it's irrelevant. Like, if he's doing the show, does it matter what people in the crowd are doing? I guess the whole vibe might change if everyone's staring through their phone instead of, singing along and dancing in the aisles. But I don't think you can bar them. I agree with him. When I grew up, the first Iron Maiden show I saw, everyone held cigarette lighters in the air, and now everyone holds their phone. So I do get it. Yeah. But that's just the generation. That's just the time and place we are. That everybody wants to record because it's all about what you put on your socials.
One of my favourite clips on YouTube is a guy. How old would it be now? 30 years. You'll be able to tell me. John Farnham in concert in Melbourne with the Melbourne Philharmonic and his version of Help. Now, everyone's holding a cigarette lighter. It is just the most magical thing I've ever seen.
Yeah.
It is the of course, if he did that today, it'd be a sea of screens, wouldn't it?
It would. And just touching on Johnny Farnham, is he the best voice that Australia has ever produced?
Without a doubt.
Without a doubt.
Yes.
Yeah, without a doubt. Male, female. I think he's the top of the pops. I think, and especially singing that song, like the man's a god. He's a vocal god.
He is absolutely unbelievable, and it's a shame as to what happened with him when he fronted the Little River Band after they dumped Glenn Shorrock, because Graham Goebel, in particular, he is one of the founding members of LRB. He's the guy with the glasses.
Yeah.
Right? B. Birtles was the other one. He's the left-handed guitarist, and Glenn Shorrock. And then there was that traitor, Wayne Nelson, who played bass. But when Farnham joined the Little River Band, Graham Goebel, this is what I hear, hated it because they went from being LRB to John Farnham and the Little River Band. Yeah. It was never Glenn Shorrock and the Little River Band. It was just LRB. But when Farnham joined, because Glenn Wheatley managed both, apparently Graham Goebel resented it. And this is before the days of cordless radio microphones. You had microphones with a lead. And you know how Farnham performs, right?
Oh,
Graham Goebel hated it, so he instructed the road crew to shorten the length of his microphone lead to keep him in the middle.
What a prick. Johnny Farnham came into the band with a name. Like, he was John Farnham. Like, it's not as if he's just some karaoke singer they picked up at Wyong Leagues Club. He's someone. He's Johnny Farnham. Like, so I'm all down for it. It is Johnny Farnham and the Little River Band.
there is a great song. It's from a John Farnham album called Uncovered. And it's got a picture of him with his hands in front of his face. It's very hard to find. You'd find it. It's the album where we first heard him sing Help.
Yeah, right.
It was a studio version. Well, there is a song on that album, Adam, called Back to the Backwoods. It's a rock blues song. It is sensational. Wait till you hear what Farnham does with his voice on that song, Back to the Backwoods. And ironically, that was written by Graham Goble and B. Birtles long before Farnham joined LRB.
Yeah, right.
Back to the Backwoods, John Farnham. Folks, see if you can find it and listen to what he does with his voice. It is one of the best things you'll ever hear.
I mean, just the start of is it Take the Pressure Down with the clapping and the clicks and it's one of the best openings to an Australian song ever. Like it's spine-tingling. To see that live would be unbelievable.
And Playing to Win.
Yes, another huge hit.
And Down on the Border was a Farnham LRB song. Great harmonies, country rock.
Yep.
Anyway, Adam, just to do some more housework if we can. On Tuesday's episode, we spoke to employment expert Graham Wynn from Superior People Recruitment. And Adam, you've got to hear this, Adam. He read out one of the most ridiculous job resumes you've ever received. It is just absolutely jokeable. And this frustrates Graham because when you're unemployed and on a benefit, you have to prove that you're applying for jobs. And This is clearly somebody rorting the system, applying for a job that they don't want. Watch this.
About me. I have a big willy. My back is I do drugs. Swingers parties are the The agency I use is a money-hungry troll who has never done anything good for the community and has been known to enjoy buggery. Dead babies are used in moisturisers. Go yourself and have a great day.
You can't make this up. That was a real job resume from someone who clearly doesn't want work. And I said to Graham Wynn, report that person to Centrelink. And he says, you do, and he's done it 100 times. Nothing's ever done because they don't have the manpower, they don't have the time to track these things down. That is someone rorting the system. Are you with me?
Absolutely. You and I would have done. I'd call him in for a second interview and make him shit himself that I'm going to give him the job. Then see what happens.
Give him the job.
Yeah, I like your ingenuity and your sense of humour. You're hired.
We had a listener leave us a voicemail. This is Mick. Have a listen to this.
I agree with you. Employ the people that are suited to the job. I used to have a service station in the early 80s, and I employed young girls in small clothing and beefy young blokes with rib abs and all that to work as my driveway attendants, and my business doubled. All the girls, when they came in for the job, I told them the less you wear, the more you got paid. And I told the blokes, the smaller the budgie smugglers and the more abs you got, the more you got paid. And they loved it, and they worked hard, and they got paid for it, and I made a lot of money. G'day, love the podcast, mate. Keep going, you're doing good. Mick in Western Australia.
Yeah, good on you, Mick. Obviously, Mick's referring to Hooters, which is now shut down. And I asked the question, obviously to work at Hooters, you had to be an attractive young female with big breasts.
With Hooters?
Wear the tight shorts. And I wanted to know why that wasn't discrimination. And Graham said, well, if that's the look they're after, anyone who doesn't look like that, unfortunately, doesn't get the job. He was representing a real estate agency, a big one, a national real estate agency, and they wanted a receptionist for their new office that they were opening in Melbourne. And the requirement that Graham was given, we want a looker. We want an attractive female looker. She doesn't have to have any qualifications. We just want someone good looking at the reception desk. There you are.
I think that is discrimination. I mean, I don't know. If the system works, it works, and I get having that point of view. Yeah, it's a minefield that if you're hiring or firing, it's an absolute minefield. Like when I first started down here, we had a staff member. This staff member had maybe 20 piercings in their face. Like, I'm pretty liberal. I've got tattoos. I've had my tongue pierced. I'm pretty liberal, but I found it confronting. So do you hire?
I find you confronting.
Well, there you go. So imagine me with 20 piercings in my face. Like, they were everywhere.
But hang on. If somebody with coloured hair, Doc Martens, tattoos and piercings worked at JB Hi-Fi...
Oh, you're a shoot. You're a lock. Yeah.
You wouldn't care.
That's right.
Because it's all relative.
But that's their business model. Yeah, but that's their business model. It's almost that's their thing where they have the weird and the wonderful working for them. But I'm selling antiques to Auntie Joan, who's 85 years old. It's not the look that I need. I mean, I still get... I'll tell you this. I went and had a look at an estate yesterday. There was two sisters, very prim and proper. I had long sleeves on, and I had to go under the house, so I took my jacket off and my tattoos came out, and they totally looked at me differently. When I first turned up, I was speaking to them very politely, it was all very cordial. But as soon as I took my jacket off and they saw the tattoos, their demeanour changed.
Is that right?
It happens.
I reckon we're over tattoos in the year 2025.
Exactly.
I mean, once upon a time you were barred from going into some nightclubs and you had to cover up your tats. I don't think anyone cares anymore.
No, you're right. It's 2025. Tattoos are a bit passé these days. I mean, a lot of people have them. It's irrelevant. And you know, back in the day, bikies and sailors had tattoos. Let's be honest. You know, that's the only people that had tattoos. These days, it is so mainstream, and the tattoo industry has evolved so much. They're absolute artworks. Some of the tattoos that people are producing these days, like they are, it's ridiculous how skillful these tattooists are. So, I think people still hold that stigma. You're a criminal if you got tattoos, but I think people are slowly getting over it.
Lots to talk about, and if you'd like to add content to the Bonafide podcast, Luke Boner, radio guy at gmail.com. And if you want Adam to conduct a valuation on something precious to you or something that you hope might be precious, Adam, how do they get in contact with you?
Adam@allbids.com.au. Anything you got, hit me up there.
But right now, one of our favourites here on the Man Cave today is the wonderful Granny Sue Cooey.
Good morning, you two.
Not one of our favourites. Our very favourite. Let's be honest.
Our
very favourite.
You're so sweet, both of you.
Adam, I spoke to Granny Sue earlier on in the week, and I said I would get her back on the Man Cave to talk through some topics with you. One of our topics last week, Adam McDonald.
Yeah.
We asked the question, is watching porn cheating? Especially if you're watching it in secret on your own. Is it a form of cheating? And Granny Sue, you said?
No, it's not. We all have a look. I mean, I've had a look at porn. I mean, I want to know what it was all about.
Granny Sue watches porn, Adam. This is something like it's been in my head all week. Granny Sue actually watches porn, or she did.
Well, if I could, I probably would still do it. I'm not dead yet.
I think if you watch it in secret, it is a little bit dubious. If you open it up front with it and say, I'm going to watch some porn, or I watch some porn, fine. But someone once told me it doesn't matter where you get your appetite from as long as you eat at home. Does that make sense? So, you know, you're watching porn. Yeah, I don't know. I think if you watch it in secret, I think it might be a little bit suspect.
Okay, but what if you're gratifying yourself and you're fantasizing about someone else? Is that cheating?
Oh, it's a can of worms. I don't know. I guess it depends on what sort of relationship you have with your partner.
You should be honest and above board.
Yeah, exactly.
I think you should just be honest and say, you know, okay, I watch porn. Would you like to come and watch some with me? I mean, I still think it's better than going out and having an affair. I really do. I don't care whether you're doing it in secret or not. I just still think it's better.
Is having a wet dream where another person besides your partner's involved in the dream, is that cheating?
You can't help that. It's a dream. Like, you can't choose your dreams.
Totally agree.
Can you?
Totally agree.
Kelsey's winding us up. These things need to be talked about, Kelsey. It's healthy. Look, this is a story I'll run past both of you, and I'll get your thoughts first, Brother Adam.
Yep.
We've got recent research that's just out showing that significant number of Australians, roughly the ages 18 to mid-20s, so we're talking 1 in 5, do not fully understand that technology-based tracking of a partner without consent is a form of violence against women. Now, the story coming out of the University of Melbourne says that most young people don't have a problem with tracking their partner's phone, monitoring their phone, their whereabouts, their movements. Adam, is tracking your partner's phone or having an app on your phone that can track where your partner's phone is and insisting on it, is that okay?
No, not at all. Not ever. No way, in any way, shape, or form. It's a form of control. It's a form of dominance, and it's bullshit. Like if my partner said to me, "I'm going to track your phone," I'd say, "Shove it up your ass. I'll go where I want. I'll tell you where I'm going. But if you don't trust me, I'm in the wrong relationship." I think it's ridiculous. I even said to Wonder Boy that I was going to put it on his phone just so I know for safety reasons. You know, he's 13 years old. He's going to and from school, and he said, "I don't want you to," and I understood, and I totally understood. I said, "Yeah, fair enough. If you don't want me to know exactly where you are 100% of the time, that's your choice. As long as you're open and honest with me about where you're going and who you're with, I don't need to." And that was the deal we struck, and it was all fine.
Granny Sue, is it okay to track your partner's phone?
No, definitely not. What a load of garbage. No. If you are in a relationship where you need to have total control, you need to, your partner or you need to get out of that relationship, because that's not healthy. And no way that's even a thought. I wouldn't even think about that. I'd just hope I can trust them enough to let them go and do what they need to do. I mean, if you can't trust someone, why are you trying to track them? Don't be there. There's more to life than that.
What do you think, folks? Luke Boner, Radio Guy at gmail.com. More than 13% of the 2,000 adults surveyed said it was reasonable for a partner to monitor them using location sharing apps. Life 360 is one. Find My Phone.
No.
Hang on. Let's bring in the millennial, because the millennial, Kelsey, who has just got engaged to lovely Nathan, I asked Kelsey this question, Granny Sue and Adam, listen to this. I asked Kelsey, do you and Nathan have an app that can track each other's phones? Kelsey, you take it from here.
We do, and it's not to keep track of what we're doing. It's is so good in terms of logistics. So if Nathan's out at work and I know he's, coming home at some point and I'm getting dinner ready that night, it's so convenient to just go, "Oh, do I need to put dinner on now? Let me see if Nathan's on his way home."
Oh, so it's like tracking an Uber.
Yeah, so I look at my phone and I'm like, "Oh, he's still at work. I don't need to put dinner on yet." We have a very healthy relationship. So I only ever look at where he's at when I'm trying to work out when I need to put dinner on, what time we need to leave, that type of stuff. It's so convenient for those logistics purposes. I don't think we've used it in any other context.
But can't you isn't that what a text message is for? What time are you going to be home, love?
But then but it's so annoying. It saves time that way, because then I don't have to wait for him to reply. What if he's in a meeting and he doesn't get back to me until he's actually on his way home, and then I'm sitting around waiting for him to reply? I can literally just see in real time what's happening. And then that's
I guess my point of view is from the twice divorced man. I understand you must have a very healthy relationship and an open and honest relationship, but I'm 2-0, so maybe I'm just cynical. I don't know.
Okay, Granny Sue.
Well, I grew up where there was no mobile phones or anything like that.
Yeah, so you're back in your Granny Sue. Back in your day, you used smoke signals.
Not quite that far back, but anyway, we certainly didn't have mobile phones, and we certainly didn't have anything. You just had a fair idea what time they were going to be home. And if they weren't home, well, okay, tea was going to be a little bit late. You would cook something and put it in the oven and went to bed. I never ever stressed about where they were or what they were doing. I probably should have when I think about what happened to me, but we didn't have mobile phones. We didn't. And it's called trust. And I don't think you need to know where everybody is at any time of the day. I really don't. It's their choice, and they need to be able to do what they need to do.
It's true. Like even when I was growing up before mobile phones, like I'd tell my parents that, you know, I'm at the local youth centre playing in the table tennis club, but really I'm dying from alcohol poisoning in the local park. But I always made it home, and it was totally fine. So yeah,
yeah, but
it was totally fine. I guess it's just it's the day. That's the day and age, I guess.
Yeah, but back in Granny Sue's day, as I said, they had smoke signals, or they used to beat drums from one tribe to another.
Yeah, I mean, and I guess if you don't make it home for dinner, you don't eat. It's on you, so you make sure you get home.
Okay, here's a dilemma. I'll bring the millennial back in. What if one person says, I want the app on my phone so I can see where you are, but the other person says no? What happens then?
Oh, well, that's their choice. I think you both have to consent.
They're saying no, I don't.
If Nathan didn't consent to it and he didn't want that, then it wouldn't be a problem for me. Like for us, it's
wouldn't you think he's trying to hide something?
Exactly.
No, because I think people I mean,
bullshit. If one wants the app and the other one insists on no, it could be misconstrued that they want their privacy and they don't want to.
But I also think that like the right partner has the same morals and the same ethics as you. So Nathan and I don't see any problem with having Find My iPhone on. If I was with somebody that had a problem with that, we probably wouldn't be together. So for me, it's not a big issue.
But then you're very lucky.
Yes, I am.
You're very lucky.
Yeah, it could cause dramas. A bit like, can we sign a prenup?
Oh yeah, that's another.
Got nothing to sign a prenup for, so we're right there.
that's exactly.
You're the club, mate.
That's exactly what.
Hey, let me tell you, Kelsey, Nathan's parents are cashed up. I've heard about Nathan's dad's car collection. You might be on a good thing there, Kelsey.
Does he want to sell the cars?
I'm not a gold.
Hit me up.
Hey, listen, we should talk about Nathan's dad's car collection. I think it's a lot more diminished than it used to be, but he's got a shed up the hill here.
Yep.
Full of cars. Oh, God. Anyway, that's another topic for another day. What do you collect? Let us know. Luke Boner, radioguy@gmail.com. Now, look, we're running out of time for today because, Adam, you've got an appointment. I want to show you something. Granny Sue can't see us. She hasn't got the whiz-bangery that you and I struggle with.
That was this morning.
Okay, it's from Steve Mapp of Blue Haven. And this box arrived, Adam, and whenever parcels arrive here, I never, ever open them because the Minister for War and Finance, she loves opening parcels.
Sure, who doesn't?
When I used to get things at Triple M and 2GB, I had to bring it home unopened because she just gets excited opening parcels. So, Adam, I'm going to open this for you now.
Yeah.
And I want you to see what's in here. Are you ready?
I'm ready.
Oh,
you got one. Isn't it an original one?
That's the sound of the engines.
Yeah. Is it an original one?
Shush, you just interrupted it. Listen. Oh, no, that's the engines. This, folks, is a toy Thunderbird 2. I've opened the wings. It has the legs that...
This is riveting. So tell me this. Tell me who made it.
Just wait a second. I'm showing you something. It's Thunderbird 2.
Thunderbird 2.
Now, watch this. Oh, I pushed the wrong button. Hang on.
Where are we?
Oh, here we are. So out of the middle comes Thunderbird 4.
Which is the submarine.
The submarine.
Tell me who made it. Have a look underneath. Who made it?
Granny Sue, do you know what Thunderbirds are?
No. Should I? Am I missing something?
It's very hard to explain if you don't know.
Warning, jet blast. Oh, okay. No, that's not who made it. I can't see who makes it. And it's not in the original box. But how good is this for the man cave?
Is it plastic?
Yeah, it's plastic. It's not the metal one.
Yeah, so it's a modern one.
Yeah. But he also sent me this. A smaller one.
Oh, gee whiz.
Now, do you remember when we were talking to Trevor Long about Thunderbirds? And he wanted a Thunderbird 2, and he said that was the orange rocket. I said, no, that's 3.
No, that's 3, yeah.
That was 3. So this is Thunderbird 2 with Thunderbird 4 inside it. And it's sent by Steve from Blue Haven. And I want to thank him very, very much. So what are they worth?
Oh, the original ones would be worth in good condition to be worth $800,000. But those sort of modern ones, they're not worth a great deal. But you know, you're going to put it in the man cave. It looks the part. It's all good.
Well, because for many years I didn't have television, because where I was living and working, I suppose I missed out. Oh, I missed out on all this wonderful stuff. I can't wait.
I know this goes back to the 60s, and it was Saturday morning cartoons. And
yeah, well, I never had TV then.
It wasn't a cartoon; it was a puppet. They
was
were
a puppet
marionettes.
show.
They were marionettes. Jerry Anderson invented it with his wife, and Ray Barrett, the Australian, was one of the voices. Thunderbird 1 was part. All the Thunderbird brothers. They lived on this. Granny Sue, let me just give you a bit of background here.
Okay.
The father was a millionaire and a billionaire. And he operated a rescue squad called Thunderbirds. They got people out of danger. They rescued people from disasters. And he had all this money. And all the Thunderbird pilots were named after real astronauts. So you've got Thunderbird 1, which was a grey rocket, but it went up and then flew horizontally. And it was piloted by Scott. Thunderbird 2, which I now have in the man cave, which was the transporter. It transported other Thunderbirds, like Thunderbird 4, it was piloted by Virgil. The space rocket that Trevor Long got mixed up with, the orange one that went up into space, that was flown by Alan, named after Alan Shepard. And the submarine was Gordon. He was the Submariner. And then you had Thunderbird 5, which was a satellite that orbited in space, and that was manned by John, named after John Glenn. So there you are, Jerry Anderson, the Thunderbirds, and now I have Thunderbird 2 and Thunderbird 4 in my man cave, Adam. How good is that? How many years have I been asking for this?
Oh, unbelievable. A beautiful thing about the collectible market is companies remaking these toys to keep the nostalgia alive. I mean, I came across a boxed up Castle Grayskull the other day, and I absolutely squealed like a schoolgirl. That's my holy grail, is a vintage Castle Grayskull. But looking at the box, it looked perfect. But then it had a barcode on it, so I knew it was a remake, which was a bit of a downside. But yeah, I mean, it's great. It's all about recapturing your childhood, isn't it?
Granny Sue, just before we let you go, is there a toy from your childhood, not the penny farthing that you were very fond of, but is there a toy from your childhood that you'd love to find again? Is there a toy that you really miss?
No, because we never had a lot of toys. Mum and Dad never had a lot of money, and a lot of our toys were cans with rocks in it tied up with string that you pulled along, or if it was nothing really, really exciting. We never really had much toys, and we were always out on our horses and stuff, so never sort of played with toys much. Not that I can remember anyway.
Not a skipping rope, not a hula hoop, not a yo-yo?
No, we had yo-yos, but they weren't. They were just something that was there. We never had time to play with them because every spare time we weren't at school, we were out on our horses or down the creek building dams or doing stuff. We were outside. We were never sort of sitting inside playing with toys. No, that just didn't happen.
What can you say to that,
We
Adam?
were outside.
What can you say to that?
Different time.
Just quickly, Adam, speaking of yo-yos, there's a huge market for yo-yos, the old Coca-Cola yo-yos. God, I wish I'd kept a few.
Oh, look, do you remember growing up, they'd have the Coca-Cola, the Coca-Cola yo-yo team would come to your school.
They come to your school.
And they'd just start the collectible market up all over again. It was great. I've sold a single yo-yo for over $1,200 before. And I can't remember, I think it's got to be a Russell branded from the Philippines. It's got to be a certain, I think it was the white one. So what they did, what all these collectible companies do, they'll make millions of one of them and then 100 of another. And that therefore becomes really collectible.
Yo-yos. And how clever was Coca-Cola with its branding of that logo? They put it on everything.
Yeah, absolutely.
Granny Sue, we love you. Thank you for dropping into the man cave.
That's quite all right. Anytime. I'm sitting here doing nothing, actually. So.
Yeah, we've heard.
Well, I'm retired now. I'm allowed. Good on you.
Go play with the horses. I'll talk to you soon, Granny Sue.
No, I'll be too old shortly. Won't be able to do anything. So.
No, you'll be saddling up. I just know it. We'll talk to you again. We'll talk to you again, Granny Sue, because there's lots to talk about. You have yourself a good day. Adam McDonald, the General Manager of All Bids Auctions based in Canberra, the largest online auction house in the Southern Hemisphere. How do people get in touch with you?
That's adam@allbids.com.au. And just remember, I run the Canberra division. We are also up in Sydney. So anyone in Sydney that needs to go and see someone, go see Pete at All Bids in Tarrant Point. We have 2 different rooms.
Adam, talk to you soon.
Thanks, Skipper. Thanks, Kels.
Coming up on Bonafide with Luke Boner, Amelia Oberhardt, who is an investigative journalist, and she has a series of sensational podcasts on Listener, The Secrets We Keep. Today, we're looking at IVF and sperm donations. It's fascinating. Stay with us. Amelia Oberhardt, welcome to Bonafide with me, Luke Boner, here on my podcast. You're not listening to me on the wireless on the Triple M network anymore.
I know you're very missed, but I'm thrilled you've got a podcast and much better access for everyone worldwide now, not just 71 stations.
Well, the fun thing about the podcast is I can talk to people who inspire me, and you've got the time to hear the story. You're not hampered by the restrictions that commercial radio has. Mind you, the overnight program on Triple M, I did have plenty of time to hear good stories. When you do a busy shift on commercial radio, you've got 4 or 5 minutes and then it's the next thing, and it can be really frustrating.
Yeah, and you get cut off, I guess, also by ad breaks and things that you don't really have to worry about.
Oh, those pesky things that pay your wages.
Yeah, the good old sales department that you need.
Listen, if it wasn't for them, we wouldn't have been earning money. So I do know where my bread's buttered.
Yes.
Thank you, Flip Connect, and thank you, Nature Bee and the others.
I bought Nature Bee because of you.
Tell me what happened.
Well, I was working breakfast hours for 18 years. I think in the end I just absolutely burnt out. But Nature Bee, I got the whole office on it, actually. Someone went on a subscription. But yeah, it was great. Slept like a baby.
Well, that is sensational. Let's talk about this latest installment in the podcast series, Secrets We Keep, which is on Listener. You are uncovering a very, very, well, I guess the dark underbelly of the fertility industry. And you're talking about Facebook sperm donors, anonymous biological fathers, and international surrogacy. It's absolutely fascinating. Well done. How did all this come about? I want to listen.
So the real, I guess, crux of the story is the first season of Secrets We Keep, Shame, Lies and Family, largely focused on the forced adoption era, and we've talked about that.
That's what you and I talked about last time.
So that largely focused on the forced adoption era. And off the back of that, I was contacted by a woman named Dr. Caitlin McMillan. She'd done a PhD into the outcomes of donor-conceived adults. She mentioned if I wanted to keep in the theme of family secrets that I should look into the fertility industry, but by and large look into the use of anonymous sperm through the 80s and 90s here in Australia. So it's kind of where I picked up and went, I think there's something in this, and I kind of swished it around with my producer, and she was like, yeah, there's probably not enough. I was like, well, we could look at the fertility industry as a whole, let's look at it from a 360-degree view of every facet we can kind of get. And what we kind of found was this rabbit hole, and it just kept going down different burrows. And by the end, we could have kept going for 20 episodes, but we kind of stuck to some sort of main theme lines. It really took itself on its own journey.
You mentioned the rabbit hole. Go down that hole for us. What did you discover?
So I think a few of the most shocking stories we found was certainly that the forced adoption era really ends because you invent the pill, you accept abortion.
The decision to have a child should not be a matter to be decided by the male-dominated legislature.
Combined preparations containing an estrogen and a progestogen are taken in constant proportions, usually for 21 days.
So unwanted children, they don't happen anymore so much. The families that biologically wanted children now have a chance to. So adoption rates plummet and an IVF explodes. In the beginning of IVF...
It's bloody expensive.
Yeah, well, and even in the beginning it was. But back then, these doctors, they were very passionate about throwing the kitchen sink at it, and the last resort was IVF.
So we're talking 80s and 90s.
the early 1980s. There's
Thank
a group
you.
from
Yep.
Queensland and a group from Monash in Melbourne, and they're getting together and they're like, there's something in this. And in the first episode, Doug Keeping says, we were telling people we're going to invent this thing called IVF, and all these other doctors were laughing in their face, saying there is absolutely no chance you will make this happen. So they were kind of ridiculed, which made them really determined. They were trying everything, they were inventing like laparoscopic surgeries to clear out tubes and all these things, and then saying, okay, let's do IVF. When it got to that point, they started to realize, hey, it's not always the woman that's infertile. Sometimes it's the male infertility and sterility that's causing the problem. But they didn't really have an option for male issues. They couldn't freeze sperm, and they were like, oh, how are we going to fix this? So they kind of a worldwide accepted practice it became, and it was on the advice of lots of clinics all over the world, that they would use anonymous sperm donors, mix it with the husband's sperm, insert it into the woman, go home, have a shag, do your thing, and most chances the baby's yours. And if it's not, no one will ever know about it. Wow. But what they never foresaw was DNA testing coming, and certainly not at the rate it came, and certainly not to the point now where 1 in 5 Australians have done an Ancestry.com test. So all these kids are now spitting in tubes at Christmas to work out if they're half Viking or 60% Irish, and instead they're discovering, oh my God, my dad's not my dad.
My dad's not my dad.
And so the complication is that everyone in this situation was doing the right thing by what they thought. The doctor's job was to get the woman pregnant. The mother desperately wanted a child. The father desperately wanted the family to be together. And so they all signed contracts. And then the donors who were doing it for $40 for some beer money to go out or a night out on the town, or, they were doing it for clinical research or, other means, and they were being paid. So they had an incentive. They're 18-year-old guys who consequentially like, whatever, also not foreseeing DNA testing coming. They all signed contracts of anonymity. But at Christmas now, all these kids are like, I didn't sign the contract. I'm the only one in this situation that didn't have a choice.
Yes.
And now I don't know 50% of me. I don't know 50% of my DNA. I don't know 50% of my origins. And I don't know 50% of my medical history.
Medical history.
One of the huge issues is the medical history, because early onset cancers, you can't possibly know at 18 what's coming for you at 30, 40, 50, 60. And all these screenings, preventative screenings that are saving people's lives, are not being done because they don't know or they can't access the information. They're identifying information. And so only 2 states have retrospectively lifted anonymity, and that's Queensland and Victoria. And then all these kids all of a sudden got these letters saying, you're a donor kid, or men got letters saying you have 10 kids, you have 50 kids.
Yes.
But the issue is that they were promised anonymity, so I feel for them because they were doing something for medical research or science, or they were med students, or they were poor, or
just trying to help couples that couldn't conceive.
Under this guise that they would never have the responsibility of biological children. But then I also feel for the children that desperately want to know their parent.
And they have a right to know, but the donor has the right to anonymity. You're 100%. It's a difficult one. It's an ethical issue.
Huge.
Do you have any idea just how many kids are out there who have no idea?
Yeah, the big issue is with donor conception is it was never a legal requirement to list. It was at the choice of the clinic, the choice of the parent, the choice of the child to list themselves as being donor conceived. Back in the 80s and 90s, nobody, very rarely, I shouldn't say nobody, but very rarely did somebody put down in writing anywhere that they were donor conceived or they'd used a donor. There is no way of really knowing. I mean, the estimate was something like 60,000, but that would be grossly underestimated. That's why they're calling for a national donor register where everyone who is donor conceived privately through familial, so you give your brother a donation or I give my cousin my eggs or something, so they're also not recorded. There needs to be a centralised register that pulls together everybody so that we have a way of managing and legislating and regulating and knowing that you're donor conceived, but also that you don't have 700 siblings in the same city and you're making out with them or accidentally.
Yes, or reproducing with a sibling.
So there's a girl we speak to in Victoria called Catherine Dawson. She has potentially 700 siblings to a prolific donor with diagnosed schizophrenia and bowel cancer. He donated under 7 different names across 10 different clinics they went interstate, those donations. And that's what she knows of because other states haven't lifted their laws. So she doesn't know.
700.
That's just in Victoria and South Australia. And that's under the guise that every family had one child. So it could be overinflated, but it could also be conservative if some of those families had several children.
So what's the answer?
I think the centralised donor, lifting anonymity retrospectively Australia-wide, they need a federal governing body that oversees fertility, every aspect of it as a whole from a Commonwealth perspective, because currently fertility is set by the states and it's part of healthcare. So state by states, there's 30 different pieces of legislation. It's like patchwork, and none of the legislation really matches up. None of it's enforced. Sydney's not talking to Brisbane. Northern Territory's not talking to Adelaide. There's nothing stopping people crossing borders. There's been no repercussions. There's been no legal ramifications for clinics that are meant to be the barrier keepers and the gatekeepers of mistakes. Then you get into the private sperm donation world on Facebook and there's no regulation there.
There should be a centralised directory. And tell me, this fellow that may have well-fathered 700 kids, these donors, were they being paid to donate? Were they doing it for the money?
I think she asked him that. I mean, yeah, you were getting a small fee, but then by the time he was still donating, they had removed payments. So you could be covered for compensated travel, so $50 return in an Uber or something, but you were no longer paid for the donation. But I mean, he was mentally, he had been diagnosed with schizophrenia, and when he was obviously not thinking straight at some of the times, but she never really got an answer as to why.
It's frightening, isn't it? Well done on this. But it leads me to another story kind of related, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. Should being able to select your baby's gender be allowed in Australia? This is the new ethical debate which has come up recently because there is a US doctor who says it was absolutely ridiculous that the option isn't available here in Australia, that if you're going through IVF, you should be able to gender select. And there is a huge ethical debate. You're playing God. Well, IVF is probably playing God, isn't it? What are your thoughts on this ethical dilemma?
I mean, I had 2 sons and I had a baby that was a miscarriage that was a boy. So, I'd had 3 sons and I desperately had always wanted a daughter my whole life. And at one point I was like, should we go to America and I'll get my daughter? My husband was like, A, you're insane, but B, we're poor, and C, at the end of the day, how much are you taking this into your own hands? With IVF, a lot of that is, helping along a natural process, which is, eggs, sperm, all these things, and helping them come together. I think if you are starting to control it and then you're starting to remove certain gene patterns or you're removing certain, where is the natural way of life going to go? Are you going to create this super sort of cluster of people that have no pre-existing medical condition, that have no genetic fault, that have clean bloodlines, that are, designed to look away?
The question is, where do you stop? I mean, if you want to, for health reasons, try and pick and choose, cherry pick, if you will, someone whose genes are healthy, you could eliminate heart disease and you could eliminate all sorts of genetic diseases or try and narrow them down. But then I wonder, are you going to get to China? And I don't know whether you know of the basketballer Yao Ming, 7'6", played in the NBA, and he was almost genetically modified, but the Chinese government engineering who his parents were, and they made this incredible 7'6" basketballer. Could that happen?
That's what I mean. And if you have access to funds and money, what stage does it interrupt with actual society's humanity? They are also talking about having apps in which you've done genetic testing. So, I've got a gene and Joe's got a gene, and Joe and I both carry the cystic fibrosis gene. So then instead it says, you are not a match. So me and Joe never even end up meeting, even though we could be lifelong soulmates because our genetic patterns don't match. And that's what they're talking about, the future being these blood, pinprick blood tests that read your predispositions for illness and whatever, and then matching, that's how you'll be matched with your future partner so that you don't have any heartbreak. I don't know what it's designed to do.
I mean, there was the story of a Melbourne content creator, by the name of Caitlin Bailey, who has been in the news. She was already a single mum to 2 boys and a girl, conceived naturally between the ages, I think, 1 and 5. But she also wanted 2 of each gender. She spent about $45,000, including travel costs, in the process to conceive a baby girl, which is due in August. Should that be, I mean, it's $45,000. It's not available to everyone, but is it ethical?
I mean, how long is a piece of string? I think anything that puts some people at disadvantage and others at an advantage becomes an ethical issue. Where things aren't available to everybody, it already puts some people ahead of the others.
I tell you what, Amelia, it's a good talker.
It is. And I think that it evokes, and this the whole podcast the whole time, I've been sitting at dinner with groups of girlfriends or groups of couples or wherever. Everywhere I go, it evokes a conversation, and a strong one. People tend to feel very passionately about all of the issues: international commercial surrogacy, altruistic surrogacy, using donor sperm, using donor eggs, using anonymous sperm. Like, everybody feels a certain way, and it certainly evokes a lot of conversation and a lot of heated debate, or healthy debate, as we call it. But yeah, it definitely is topical.
What's next on your agenda on Secrets We Keep? What's next on Listener?
I've got so many ideas, none of which have been ticked off yet.
Well, don't tell me because I'll steal it. Can I just tell you this? All my ideas are original. Originally, I've stolen them from someone else.
Yes, exactly. Well, they say every time I say something like, every good idea someone else has had. I'm like, well, that's rude.
It's a great series, Secrets We Keep, and Amelia Oberhardt, journalist. Your dad is Mark.
He is indeed.
Who is a Brisbane-based racing and sports presenter. And it's been an absolute pleasure again. Can we do this again?
Yes, please.
I can't wait
for a bit of a guest action on Bonafide.
Bonafide, and keep that nature be.
I will. Keep it up.
Coming up, a man with a vision. The amazing Dick Smith. That's next. Folks, you've all heard of the name Dick Smith, or should I say Richard Harold Smith, who is obviously an entrepreneur. He's an adventurer, an aviator. He is one of the most philanthropic Australians you'll ever meet. He stocked Coles and other supermarket shelves with Australian brands and Australian produce.
If the Australian made is as good as the imported, we go for it every time.
And you would think after doing all of this for many, many years, he may have had enough. But no, Dick Smith keeps going. He has a lot to say about where Australia is headed, about this new government that has been re-elected for 3 years, about trade tariffs, and about Australians enjoying a standard of life. He has strong opinions on immigration, and he is one of the people who I wanted to talk to on my Bonafide podcast because he inspires me. And he's on the line right now. Dick Smith, good to talk to you again.
Hi, Luke. Great to be talking to you again.
You don't give up. You keep moving forward, don't you?
Yeah, well, I'm 81 at the moment, but I am relaxing a bit. But there's still important things to do, and I'm just thinking, I mean, we do live in a wonderful country. I think I won the lottery of life by being born in 1944. I just missed out on having to go to Vietnam, so I've never had to go to war, and basically been able to make money in a growing economy and had the freedom to say what I want to say.
Dick, you didn't do very well at school, but you did very, very well at the School of Life. In fact, I think you have a master's and a PhD in life. I wanted to take a bit of a deep dive into your past, and I also want to talk about your wonderful wife, Pip, who you've been with for many, many years now. But you started as a car radio nut. Your business grew to become Australia's largest electronics retail chain, the Dick Smith Electronics. It grew massively back in the 1970s, I think initially through the sale of CB radios, citizen band radios, and then you moved into personal computers. You had annual sales of about $17 million by 1978. Let's start with that Dick Smith Electronics vision. How did that come about?
Well, it's interesting because you're absolutely right. I was hopeless at school, and I really thought I'd never get anywhere. But one day I started a small business. It was actually to fix the Manly Cab two-way radios, and I was good at doing that. So I started at Neutral Bay on Sydney's North Shore at the Big Bear car park and would fix the Manly Cab radios. And then I started installing car radios, and that was okay. But then one day I decided to start selling electronic components, and that's ended up with the business that eventually, when Woolworths sold it, had 350 shops around Australia and was doing $1.4 billion turnover.
Dick Smith, the electronic wizard in the electronic land of Oz. We are the Dick Smiths, whiz kids.
And by the way, I started the whole thing with $610.
It's just unbelievable. You sold Dick Smith to Woolworths. From memory, it was about $25 million. You retained no shares. You had no role in the company, but they used your face and your name. Were you happy that they continued to do that right to the end?
Yes. Well, I wasn't happy what happened in the end. Let me explain what happened. When I sold to Woolworths, I had about 30 shops, and we were selling to electronic hobbyists. And I said, look, there's room for about 100 shops. But Woolworths, being a public company, they had to grow forever. They went to, as I mentioned, 350 shops, and in the end, they couldn't get any more growth. They had it for about 40 years and made a lot of money out of it, which was good. Then they sold it to a company called Anchorage Capital.
Strong competition and falling prices of consumer electronics have made Dick Smith a drag on Woolworths' earnings for some time. Even though sales improved in the most recent quarter, Woolies has decided enough is enough.
Which bought it for $90 million and then refloated it for, I think, about $500 million 2 years later. And within 18 months, it went broke and everyone lost their money. So it was very sad in the end, all completely unnecessary. If they'd kept down to about 100 shops, it would still be going and booming today.
You say they got greedy?
Yeah, well, it's one of the problems with modern capitalism. It has to have perpetual growth. If you have a public company and it's not continually growing, the shares go down in value and all the super funds sell and people get the sack. And because of this mad forever growth, and as you know, it's one of the things I've always been on about, you can't grow forever. One day you have to live in balance. And I believe when it comes to, say, population in Australia is on its way to 100 million, I think that will be crazy. I think we should level it off less than 30 million, and that will be better for everyone, and people will be able to afford a house to live in again.
I want to get to that, and we'll get to that down the track. There's a bit more to you. I said that you're one of Australia's greatest philanthropists, and we'll talk about that. But I just want to talk about business ideas and the vision that you had, because I remember you started Australian Geographic magazine, which was a National Geographic style magazine, and it focused on Australia. And you sold that business to Fairfax back in 1995 for $41 million. Are you sorry you sold it?
Well, in a way. I mean, it's still going now. I just got my last issue. And yes, I am in a way. Look, I like starting things and building them up, but I'm not much good at running them. I need change in my life. And it's a pity in a way that I've not been able to stick to things. I've had sort of three businesses, Dick Smith Electronics, as you mentioned, then Australian Geographic, and then Dick Smith Foods. And all of them, when it gets to a point that I sort of say, no, I've had enough of this and I decide to sell it, or in the case of Dick Smith Foods, we just couldn't compete any longer with Aldi with their really cheap imports. And so rather than, I just decided to close it down. But the good thing there was we'd given about $11 million to charity, so that was worthwhile.
You did. All the profits from Dick Smith Foods went to charity. It's almost as though you did it for fun. But I know...
Yeah, but all the profits did go, but also the money that I got from Australian Geographic, the $41 million, we gave that away too. So basically the money I made for Pip and myself was from Dick Smith Electronics, and we invested that. Not many people know this, but we invested it in commercial buildings, and we still own quite a few commercial buildings, which of course in Sydney have gone up in value. So our wealth creation has really come from having commercial factories and office buildings rather than electronics or publishing.
I remember when I spoke to you, I've spoken to you quite a few times on radio, but I remember talking to you once. I think I had just started at the Triple M network, and Dick Smith Foods, you were really frustrated. You couldn't get decent positioning on shelves, and you were very, very upset about the Australians that you employed and the farmers that you supported. And there was the Dick Smith cereal, and it was on the bottom shelf of the Coles downstairs at World Square, and there were 8 boxes left, and I went and bought all 8 because I loved do you remember the Crunchy Nut?
Yep, definitely.
The Crunchy Nut cereal. And so I bought the last 8. So you'd be pleased to know I stuck with you to the end.
Oh, good on you, yes. Yeah, no, that was really good days, Dick Smith Foods, and if I'd been maybe 30 years of age, not 70, I probably would have kept it going, but because it was an exciting time supporting Australian farmers. We'd go out with a current affair and we'd meet the farmers. We went to Cowra Canneries and we kept them going for probably another decade, and eventually they closed down, but that was the only Aussie-owned cannery still left in Australia. We used to can the beetroot. I remember even giving beetroot away free at one stage as a bit of a publicity thing, because it was so the farmer was going to plough the beetroot back into the ground because he couldn't sell it. So luckily we bought it and were able to give it away and sell it.
Is that the beetroot? I thought it was asparagus, but maybe because that was in Cowra as well. You gave it away one Saturday morning on the Ocean Road at Manly.
We're giving it away today down at Manly, basically to show that if we're not prepared to pay a decent price for our food, we won't have any farmers, we won't have any workers at all.
Yeah, that's right, a huge truckload of beetroot. We drove it down there and we gave it away for nothing. Beautiful beetroot. It was stuff that was going to be ploughed back into the ground. We paid to get it cooked and then canned by Cowra Canneries, trucked it down, and we gave it all away. That was a fun thing to do.
I remember I was on 2GB then, and I spoke to you that Saturday morning.
Oh, wonderful. I'd just forgotten that. Well, that's good.
I hope you haven't forgotten the time I came to your house and made Anzac biscuits with you in your kitchen.
No, I remember that clearly, like it was yesterday.
Dick was very upset that, one, Anzac biscuits were being called Anzac cookies, and he had his own recipe, and Anzac Day was approaching. It was just around the corner, and I was on radio, and I broadcast a conversation. Dick was actually cooking. He got the ingredients out, and we actually put together a batch of Anzac biscuits live on radio in Dick Smith's kitchen at Ingleside.
Yep.
That was a funny, funny morning. I want to get back to Dick Smith. I want to get back to Dick Smith Foods because you have always been filthy on foreigners owning Australia, and one of those foreign-owned companies that's been in your sights for some time now has been Aldi, the German-owned Aldi supermarkets. Explain to my listeners again why you're not happy with Aldi.
Yeah, the reason I'm not happy with Aldi is that they've got a very brilliant German formula where they only have half as many staff. When you go to Coles or Woolworths, you're paying to employ tens of thousands of Australians who are getting good wages. Aldi came here, they have, of course, less of a range, and they only employ half as many staff per dollar of turnover, so naturally they can make more profits. Then when it comes to, say, peanut butter, we were making our peanut butter, buying it from the Kingaroy farmers, the peanut farmers up in Queensland, and then we were bringing the peanuts down to Sydney and processing them and making peanut butter.
Yeah.
And then we found Aldi kept discounting and selling cheaper and cheaper, and people would support Australian farmers if it was 30 cents dearer. But in the end, we were, I think, about $1 dearer than Aldi, and I couldn't work this out. So eventually I found out that Aldi were not only getting their peanuts from Argentina, but because they're so huge and so international, they'd started off a manufacturing processing plant in Argentina where the wages are very low. And so the whole of the peanut butter came from Argentina. And basically it put all the Aussie farmers out of business. Now, that didn't make me happy. The other thing is Aldi's owned by two unbelievably rich German billionaires. They're worth $40 billion. But what gets me, instead of them being open philanthropists, they are just utterly greedy. They're super secretive. And from what I can make out, they've never given a cent to anyone. And the money they must be taking out of Australia, I've heard that they're the most profitable supermarket in Australia. But whereas with Coles and Woolworths, they're owned by Australian shareholders, super funds, mum and dads and everyone. As I mentioned, Aldi's ships all the money to Germany, but it's all secretive. So you don't know how much they're paying, how much tax they're paying. And I just don't know why the owners of Aldi wouldn't be honest enough to come to Australia and say, well, look, these are our plans and this is why we're here. No, ultra secretive, and that sort of goes against everything I know about Australia.
Does the huge duopoly that's enjoyed by Coles and Woolies upset you?
No. In fact, Coles and Woolies were always very good to us. They always supported us, yes. We did get put on the bottom shelf because they have to run businesses and they put the product that sells the most at eye level. But look, Coles and Woolworths make about 6 cents in the dollar, about 6%, which is not a lot of profit, especially if you've got your super fund with shares in Coles and Woolworths, which lots of typical Aussie super funds are invested in these two great companies. So I haven't seen any rip-off pricing. If there's rip-off pricing, where's it going to? Because they're public companies and all of the figures are completely public. I've always thought they're just wonderful companies and we're very lucky to have them.
Did you have much trouble getting your products on the shelves of Coles and Woolies to start with?
Yes, it was really difficult because, first of all, I think Coles and Woolies have about 28,000 different products, whereas I think Aldi have 1,500. It's something like that. It's a huge range. And so to add more products to the Coles or Woolworths shelves, you have to show that you're going to get at least, I think in those days it was 5% of the market in that particular field. Now that's really difficult. And even though we had lots of support from people supporting Aussie farmers, when it comes to the supermarket, most people tend to buy the cheapest product or the product they've always bought. You know, Kellogg's cornflakes, just because that's what we've always bought it, Wheat Bix, something like that. And so it was really difficult for us to get in. I didn't blame the supermarkets. In fact, the reason we were able to do, I think it was over $300 million to help Aussie farmers, was because Coles and Woolies supported us and IGA. So that was pretty good. And so I was pretty happy with the business we did and the money we were able to give away.
Would you do it again?
Would I do it again? Yes, I'd do it again and started when I was younger. If I'd started it when I was about 30 years of age, Dick Smith Foods, it would still be going today and it would be turning over billions of dollars a year. But you get burnt out, you get a bit old, and I used to work 60, 70 hours a week on these businesses and loved it. I don't have that get up and go now.
You're not slowing down. I just introduced you and said he refuses to slow down.
Well, I'm still flying the helicopter. I'm jumping in the helicopter this afternoon to fly up to see John Singo. And so I'm still flying, but I'm 81 years of age and I am slowing down a bit. My short-term memory's not as good, but all my friends say that are the same.
You have been an advocate for the civil aviation industry in Australia for a long time. In fact, I think you were chairman of the board. You were appointed by Bob Hawke back then to be chairman of the board of the CAA, but you got your license at a fairly early age, and your adventures in flying helicopters is famous.
I never believed I'd really be a pilot. When I was a kid, I used to see planes flying overhead, and I never thought I'd ever be able to be a pilot. But when I started making some money at Dick Smith Electronics, a friend of mine who was a flight instructor said, you can come and learn to fly for about $25 an hour, which was pretty cheap. So every early morning I'd drive right out to Bankston Airport and we'd do an hour's flying. And after a while I got my flying license, then I got my fixed wing license. And then one day I got a helicopter license. And ended up flying around the world.
Yeah, you were the first person to circumnavigate the world by helicopter. You were the first pilot to ever skipper a helicopter to the North Pole. You've landed at both poles. You also were the first non-stop balloon pilot crossing the Australian continent. You did that back in 1993. Let's get back to circumnavigating the world in a helicopter. What was the most exhilarating part of that, and what was the scariest?
Well, the most exhilarating bit was getting back to Fort Worth. I'd pushed the helicopter out of the factory at Fort Worth and headed off across the Atlantic Ocean in the helicopter. Frightening, well, I was frightened numerous times, flying the Atlantic in one single-engine helicopter with no floats. I knew if the engine failed, I'd be 30 seconds into the ocean and then I'd be drowned. And so that I crossed the Atlantic in really rough weather. Then probably the riskiest thing I did in the solo helicopter flight around the world was, in those days, the Cold War existed.
Yes.
So you couldn't land in Russia. So that's the reason no one had flown a helicopter around the world. And so I decided I'd land on a ship halfway between Japan and Alaska. Now, first of all, to find a ship was hard enough. I think I sent circulars out to 200 shipping companies. Finally found a ship that would let me put some drums of fuel on the corner of their deck.
Yeah.
And then I took off from the northern tip of Japan in pitch darkness about 3 a.m. in the morning and flew for about 7 hours. In those days, it was before GPS. And the ship ran into a fog bank, and so I didn't have enough fuel to get back to Japan. I just had enough fuel to get to Russia, but I was told I'd be shot down. But so what did I do? Luckily, I mean, I've always been lucky. About 10 minutes later, the ship called back and said, look, we're just in some free air. We've run out of the fog. You might be able to land. And so I then turned and headed towards the ship. No GPS, but I'd made up a special... With the Dick Smith Electronics parts, I made up a special non-directional beacon, and I homed in on the beacon, came out of the cloud, and you can't believe it, in front of me was the ship rolling around in the ocean, and I landed on the deck, and then I pumped the drums of fuel into the helicopter, and then took off and flew another 7 hours to Alaska.
Wow.
It's a long way in a helicopter. It's equivalent to flying further than from Sydney to Auckland in New Zealand in a helicopter in one day. I'd never do that again. I was very lucky to get away with it.
Was that in the Bell helicopter?
Yeah, little Bell Jet Ranger. It's now in the Powerhouse Museum. And, little tiny Jet Ranger normally can hold 5 people altogether if you're crammed in. It's about the size of a mini miner. Normally only has about a 600-kilometre range, but I put extra fuel tank in where the passengers go.
Wow.
And that gave me the range to do the longer distances.
A bit like the drop tank in the A9X Tirana.
Yep, a bit like that. Exactly right. Yes, it's amazing. People, when I left on that helicopter flight, people always thought helicopters were only suitable for flying TV crews across cities and things like that. And when I said I was going to try and fly around the world, many people said, well, what's going to happen when you get to the ocean? But luckily, other than the shipboard landing, the longest distance you have to do over the ocean is from Timor to Darwin. I think it's about 430 nautical miles, and with the extra fuel, I was just able to do that.
It is the most unbelievable story. I mean, imagine if you had to make a forced landing in Russia, or today it'd be like having to make a forced landing in North Korea.
Yeah, no, look, in Russia would have been a problem because exactly 3 months later, if you remember, the Russians shot down that 007 Korean jet.
That's right.
It was a 747 Air Korean. It was flying from Alaska to Korea, and it got off course, and it flew over the Kamchatka Peninsula where I was flying, and the Russians, 3 months after my flight, sent up a fighter pilot and shot down a jumbo jet and killed everyone.
Yeah.
And so, without doubt, if I'd headed towards Russia, if I'd got into their territory, I would have been shot down. So I'm very lucky to be alive. Luckily, that weather changed.
It's just unbelievable. Are you an adrenaline junkie?
Yeah, definitely. Look, my spirit of adventure comes from the excitement of, can you get away with it? You mentioned the balloon flight across Australia, and I also did one from New Zealand to Australia. Now, in the balloon, you take off in zero wind.
That was in 2001.
And you've got to try and land in zero wind. Now, luckily, we took off from Carnarvon, which is right on the west coast of Western Australia, and we took off in zero wind. But then we got up into the jet stream, and at one stage we were doing, wait for it, 160 kilometres an hour. Unbelievable. We're dangling on this balloon with 4 little cables in a little gondola, and I'm looking at the GPS, and I said to John Wallington, who was flying with me, I said, look, John, we're doing 160 kilometres an hour. We're about 20,000 feet. And after 40 hours in the air, we got out to the east coast of Australia, not far from Lismore, and we knew we had to come down. But the problem was you can't really land a balloon in more than about 10 kilometres of wind. Otherwise, the gondola, you get smashed around and killed. And luckily, as we descended, I think 8,000 feet, there was still about 80 kilometres of wind. And then I looked down onto the Clarence River, and by sheer luck, I've been so lucky with weather, there was no wind at all. And so we'd taken off with no wind, flown at 160 kilometres an hour for 40 hours, and then landed at no wind. So we were incredibly lucky.
It's just unbelievable. You are an adrenaline junkie, but you're also an explorer. I mean, you would have loved to have done this a few hundred years ago and discovered new countries.
Yeah, definitely. No, my heroes are people like Kingsford Smith and Bert Hinkler, Sir Hubert Wilkins, all of those early explorers. And yes, you're right. I wish I'd been born 50 years earlier. I mean, it was amazing to me that no one had flown solo around the world in a helicopter. So I did that first. And then also I found out no one had ever managed to get a helicopter to the North Pole. And so all the people in America and Canada, where it's reasonably close, they'd never been able to do it. And so I shipped my helicopter in a container to Vancouver in Canada. And then I started flying north, and it's an incredible distance. You just fly day after day after day. And I finally got right out on the pack ice on the top of the world and landed on about a metre thick of ice on the Arctic Ocean right at the North Pole.
Speaking of the poles, I grew up in the 70s listening to radio. I've always been a radio junkie. But everyone can remember the Rocktober prank that Ian McRae did on 2SM by claiming he would put a jumbo under the Harbour Bridge, and of course it was an elephant on a raft. You're a bit of a practical joker too, because was it an April Fool's joke, or tell us about the time you were purported to have dragged an iceberg from Antarctica into Sydney Harbour? I think it was about 1978.
Yeah, well, we definitely did that. What the story was, I started the Qantas Antarctic flights, and in doing these flights, we discussed on board whether you could tow an iceberg up to Australia and melt it for water for farmers in a time of drought. And there's been discussions about this. And I then told the media, I said, look, I'm going to tow an iceberg up into Sydney Harbour. I'm going to cut up and into ice cubes and call them Dixicles and sell them for 10 cents each for 10 cents each for people's drinks. And I said, it's going to be very different to the normal ice you have. It'll be just make your drink taste so much better. Anyway, the media kept ringing me up and saying, when's the iceberg
I bet
coming?
they did.
And I had intended to get a real iceberg, but we could never charter a ship that was big enough. And also we thought the iceberg would melt. Anyway, one day in March of whatever that year was, one of my staff, Jerry Nolan, said to me, Dick, why don't we tow a fake iceberg into Sydney Harbour on April Fool's Day?
I'm loving this.
What a fantastic idea. So what we did, on the week before April Fool's Day, we hired a big Stannard's barge in Sydney Harbour. We got it all prepared, and then Hans Thulstrup, the adventurer, he towed it out through the Sydney Heads on the Friday night, the last day of March, and the next morning was April the 1st. And then he went down at pitch dark, and then he pulled a great big white plastic sheet over the barge and then covered it with firefighting foam and shaving cream so it looked like an iceberg. Then what happened early in the morning on April the 1st, we had about 200 staff working for us at Dick Smith Electronics. We'd given them a list of every radio TV station and newspaper, and we said, look, you've got to get up at dawn and ring up and say, what's that coming in through the heads? It looks like an iceberg. So can you imagine all the shipboards, all the switchboards jammed? 2GB,
Wow.
2UE, 2SM, the switchboard was just jammed with calls coming in, iceberg coming in through the harbour. And then we had 2SM, Radio 2SM. They were on board the iceberg with the two-way radio doing live crosses, and they were saying the iceberg's coming in. And I went down in my little boat to meet the iceberg at Sydney Heads, and it was a misty, rainy morning, and I couldn't get over it. It just looked like a real iceberg. And as we towed it up Sydney Harbour, the headlands just got covered with thousands of people who had come to see the iceberg. And we were doing live crosses all the time to 2SM. At one stage, the Navy got in touch and said we could moor the iceberg in Athol Bight, which was good. And then as we got to the Opera House, we pulled the plastic cover off and told everyone it was an April Fool's joke.
And you did that on 2SM. Was that with Ian McRae as well?
Yeah, I think it was with Ian McRae. Now, it's interesting. You mentioned the jumbo flying under the harbour bridge. People often say that was my April Fool's joke, and I have to tell them, no, that was 2SM. That was their brilliant idea. It wasn't mine.
And it wasn't an April Fool's joke. It was a Rocktober promotion. Everyone gets it wrong.
Right. Well, there you are. You're getting the more information is coming out every time I hear about it. It was a great story at the time, the jumbo under the harbour bridge.
I'll tell you what's a good story. Your relationship and your long marriage now to your wife, Pip. You married in 1969. How did that come about?
Well, I was very lucky because, first of all, in 69, I was working in a factory. I met Pip. I think she was 17 when I met her. She was 19 when we got married. I'm 5 years older. And I was in the Scouts. She was in the Girl Guides. And we met through that. And we used to go out rock climbing together and caving and all the things we did in those days. She was a bit of a risk taker. And so I thought, if I married her, she'd probably allow me to keep taking risks. And I thought they'd be just like climbing and cascading and canyoning and the things I was doing in the Blue Mountains. I never, ever believed that I'd have enough money not only to buy numerous aircraft, but to fly them around the world. I've now done 5 flights around the world, and all 3 of them in single-engine aircraft, and I owe my life to the reliability of North American technology, because if any of those flights, if I'd had an engine failure, there's a very good chance I wouldn't be here, because so much of it was over really dense jungle or over great big oceans.
But your relationship is amazing, because you said at the beginning of this conversation you're going up to see Singo. And I worked for John Singleton, as you know, for many, many years at 2GB.
Yep.
And I know him pretty well. He's a funny bloke. He's a conundrum. He's a larrikin. He's been in more relationships and marriages than I've had hot dinners. But he's also a giver, and he gives a lot to charities. He's a gambler.
Yep.
He's a drinker. What do you have in common with John Singleton? What do you talk about?
He's the opposite to me in many ways, but yes, I mean, I've had one wife for 55 years and he's had many, but we are different in many ways, but the same. We love Australia. We're patriots. And so I think that's the main thing. We're patriots. Singo helped me with getting Australian Geographic going in the advertising. He came up with some brilliant ideas. He's always been a great helper. When I first met him, I was just getting Dick Smith Electronics going, and I had publicity like the iceberg, and I'd started the Qantas Antarctic flights, and I used to be on the Don Lane show, and then Singleton became a bit famous, so I went to ask him advice, and I said, John, you know, I want you to make me famous. I want you to help me with advertising. And his advice was, Dick, just keep doing what you're doing. And he was pretty right. I just kept doing what I was doing, which was making myself available to the media, being able to talk without too many ums and ers and keep what I was saying interesting. And that gave me lots of publicity. So I ended up regularly appearing on the Don Lane show. Then you'll no doubt remember Singo had his own show on Channel 10. I used to appear on that.
Yeah.
And all the TV shows, and then with you, lots of the radio interviews over the years with you, and of course with Lawsy and Bob
Rogers.
Bob Rogers, you got it right. And all of those talking I used to do, building up both Dick Smith Electronics, Australian Geographic and Dick Smith Foods. Dick Smith Foods, our main success came because Brady Halls at a current affair used to cover us all the time. And if ever turnover went down, we'd ring up Brady and we'd go out to some poor farmer who was about to lose his crop and do a little segment, and all the sales would go up and everything would be wonderful again.
Tell me if I'm a dreamer, but I've been saying this for many, many years now, and I've been shot down by retail experts everywhere. But if the big supermarkets had a aisle that only sold Australian produce, and I'm talking about made in Australia, using Australian ingredients, employing Australians, the Aussie-only aisle, I would call it, that would be the first aisle I'd go to. And I'm not bullshitting. It would be the first aisle I would go to. Why don't they do it?
Well, I think that's a really good point, because I was looking at starting off Australian shops exactly like you're describing for that aisle, but starting off separate shops. But we realised that it would be very hard to compete, and for people to come to separate shops. Yes, I would have thought an aisle in the supermarket would work, but they've obviously worked out that it doesn't. What tends to happen, especially when times get tough, people buy the cheapest, and the Australian aisle will not be the cheapest. We pay decent wages here.
I'd pay a bit extra, but I would be happy to pay a little bit extra if I knew I was consuming and buying an Australian-owned product, a product that was grown here in Australia and owned by an Australian company. I'd be actually happy to pay a few cents more. Would it only be a few cents more, or would it be many dollars more?
No, it would be that was the problem. It would be more than that. Unfortunately, as I mentioned with Aldi, we ended up being $1 more expensive with our peanut butter. And people thought, what's going on here, Dick? Why are you so much more expensive? And as I explained, if you're getting your peanut butter from Argentina and you're getting it made with very low Argentina wages in the factory, you can sell it way, way cheaper. And that's when we started losing sales, because people would pay 30 cents more to buy Australian and support Australian, but they wouldn't pay $1 more. And so that probably would be the problem with the aisle, that people would find that it would be too expensive, and many of them would say, no, look, unfortunately, I'd love to support Australian farmers. I mean, a good thing, I don't think the farmers in Kingaroy in Queensland, where we grew the best peanuts in the world, I have a feeling they're not growing peanuts anymore, because I even noticed the Bega peanut butter, which used to be Australian peanuts, I'm pretty sure the last jar of that I saw was imported peanuts. So maybe our peanuts are just so expensive we can't compete for peanut butter, and that means you've got to buy stuff from overseas, which is a real pity.
What about your Aussie Mite, which was your version of Vegemite? Where did you source that?
We sourced that in Adelaide, a wonderful little company called Spring Gully, which is still going. It's making our foods. By the way, when we closed Dick Smith Foods down a couple of years ago, we gave the products to the companies, sort of the branding and everything. And so Aussie Sauce, it still is produced, and it's doing well in the supermarket. So that was the Dick Smith Aussie Sauce. It's now just called Aussie Sauce. The Aussie Mite, our version of the famous yeast spread, Vegemite, our Aussie Mite, is still available. And so a lot of those products are still around. The jams are now being sold under the Spring Gully brand name, and so they're available too. So that's really good that those products have been able to keep going.
I'm talking with Dick Smith. As you can see, there's not much the man hasn't attempted or hasn't done, and God knows what's around the corner. I remember having a vigorous conversation with you on one of my radio shows at one of the stations I've been at. I can't remember, but we were talking about Australia's sustainable population. And there was an organisation called SPA. I think when you and I were talking years ago, it had nearly 20,000 signatures, including yours. And you were then big on saying no to a big Australia. I remember you I don't want to put words in your mouth, but you said you're not against immigration, but you think it needs to be sustainable. Do you still feel that way? I want to learn how you feel about Australia's growing population and where we should be.
Yeah, definitely. Look, I still feel the same, but it's something that I've completely failed at. My belief is that I'm pro-immigration. It's what's made Australia so wonderful. But I wanted at the long-term rate of immigration has been about 80,000 a year since the war. And up until when John Howard increased it dramatically, it was about 80,000. We had a fantastic economy. We had houses that a young couple could afford with a backyard for the kids to play in, a cubby house. So the housing was affordable. It was a wonderful country, about 80,000 a year. Unfortunately, that was increased dramatically to 160,000. As you know, recently it's been over 300,000 a year. And we're on our way at the present growth rate. We're on our way to 100 million people by the end of this century when my grandkids are likely to still be alive. And no one I talk to, even the growth spruikers, think that 100 million people is a sensible number for Australia. I would like us to go back to the 80,000 immigration. That's still very generous. And then that would round off our population at about 30 million. And I think that is probably too many, but that's better than letting it go to 100 million.
Okay, but let me put this to you, because my kids are all in their late 20s. My son's 34. My daughter will be 30 soon. And I talk to them and I talk to their friends because Australia's population growth is at its lowest in a long, long time. And I ask these young Australians what they feel about having children. And nearly every one of them says, I'm not ready yet and I may not be ready for some time because of the cost of living and the housing crisis, the high cost of living, the high price of housing we may never, ever own, especially in Sydney. We may well be renting for the rest of our lives, and it's not cost effective to have children. They're an expensive thing to have. If we continue to not breed, we are going to run out of a tax base in 18 years. And one of the arguments for immigration is, well, if we can't make Australians, we're going to have to import them. Your thoughts on that?
Yeah, well, definitely. Yes, our birth rate is below replacement level, but if you went to the 80,000, that would level off. The growth rate would level off at about 30 million. So that 80,000 will level off. Now, when it comes to ageing population, that's always going to be a problem. All we're doing is putting it off. See, one day when you stop growing, let's say it's when we get to 1 billion in Australia, we're like China. When you stop growing, you're then going to have to deal with an ageing population. And how do you fund an ageing population? My view is it's going to be easier to cope with it when we've got 30 million than when we've got 100 million. The longer we put off the day of reckoning that you have to actually stop growing, the more difficult it's going to be for that generation to pay for it. And you've got to look, countries like Japan, they have 130 million people, but they don't have high immigration and their birth rate's quite low. So they're going to go to about 90 million by the 2050 or 2060. And people say, oh, what a basket case Japan is, but I've had friends who've been up there recently. They say it's booming. So it shows that you can have a reduction in population. Luckily, because we've got artificial intelligence and automation and robotics, we're going to be able to produce more with less people, and that'll be the way we'll be able to pay for the old age, for the pensions, as we get a smaller young base with a larger number of people who are older.
Let's talk about future Australia then, because you've been very vocal recently about Australia and where we should go looking 20 years into the future as far as being able to sustain energy. And you're not a big fan of, I won't put words in your mouth. I know you've been critical of politicians who say we can rely on renewables, and you're a fan of nuclear power or another form of power. Tell us about that.
Yeah, this is really important. I mean, first of all, I am a fan of renewables. They're fantastic. I've got solar cells on the roof. But I'm a realist, and I've known a lot about renewables. I drove in the first solar vehicle race from Darwin to Adelaide.
That's right.
And I've also driven a vehicle from Perth to Sydney. Solar vehicle, took the record at the time. And I consider I'm a bit of an expert on solar. And the problem is that when the sun is out and the wind is blowing, there's no doubt solar is the cheapest way of going. It's the cheapest form of energy. The problem is it's unreliable, it's intermittent. And so far, we don't have batteries that are affordable.
Or reliable.
And they don't last very long. So if you actually put batteries in that would allow us to have 24-hour per day, 7 days per week power, the power would be so expensive you couldn't afford it. That's why the only batteries we have, you hear about the great big battery in South Australia, it cost $90 million. What they don't tell you is that it can only run Adelaide. It has the capacity to run Adelaide for 7 minutes. And South Australia, which has the highest amount of renewables, it can get up to 70% at certain times of the day from solar and wind when the wind's blowing and the sun's out. It has, number one, the most expensive electricity in Australia. In Sydney, we're paying about 25 cents a kilowatt hour for electricity. In Adelaide, they pay 50 cents. It's twice as expensive because they've gone to high levels of renewables. But wait for it. In October last year, there was one particular time when South Australia was 2% on renewables. It was 1% from the battery and 1% from wind. The other 98% came from coal and gas, mainly the coal from the Yallourn Valley. In other words, South Australia can have high levels of renewables when the wind's blowing and the sun's out, as long as it's connected to the brown coal grid. Now, the present government, it thinks we can go to 98% renewables and it'll be affordable and not have nuclear. One of the problems is you don't then what we have spinning iron. The reason we've had such reliable power for the 80 years of my life is we've got these great big turbines which are spinning that have inertia. And so if there's a fault on the grid, if a power line comes down, or if suddenly a cloud comes over or the wind drops, the spinning inertia in these great big turbines in the coal power stations will keep the system running. Now, if you go 98% to renewables, you don't have that spinning inertia. The Labor Party says, we'll get artificial units. We'll make up special flywheels that will make up for that. That's never been proven. And I think to risk going to a 98% renewable system, even if we get there, it will be eye-wateringly expensive because the batteries are just so expensive that the electricity will be incredibly expensive. I look around the world, 32 countries have nuclear. France is 70% nuclear powered and has the cheapest electricity in Europe. So it sounds logical to me that we should at least look at it.
Do you think Peter Dutton lost the election not wholly and solely, but partly because of his stance on nuclear energy?
Yeah, I think so. Yes, look, when the public is being told by organisations like the CSIRO, they're telling everyone that wind and solar and storage is cheaper than coal. Now, I'm absolutely positive it's just completely not true. But if you keep telling people that, people believe it. So they're believing that we're going to completely destroy our environment with these great big turbines. 1,000 turbines are going up in the Armidale area, just completely destroy the area. But if you could run the whole thing just on wind and solar and it was cheaper, I would support it. But I believe the CSIRO are completely wrong. No country in the world has 98% renewables, and we will have to have some incredible breakthrough in battery technology, and that doesn't seem to be on the horizon. The problem is the batteries are incredibly expensive. Let me explain to you, they're encouraging people to put batteries in their homes, and the normal battery costs about $6,000. But what they don't tell you, it won't even run the house for 24 hours of cloud cover. A $6,000 battery, incredibly expensive, won't run your house for 24 hours, but we can have 5 days of cloud cover in Sydney. And so that means you're not getting your power. All of the batteries would go flat in the whole of Sydney So somewhere the power will have to come from. And my belief, it should be from nuclear. When you ask the CSIRO, they say, oh, no, we're going to put power lines all across Australia and the wind will be blowing somewhere. At night time, of course, there's no sun, so the wind will be blowing somewhere and that will power Sydney and Brisbane and all of the other places. Now, in my view, it's completely delusional. You couldn't take that risk because you'd end up, just recently, Spain at one stage got to about 100% renewables, and then about 2 weeks later, it ended up with a 10-hour blackout. Imagine that, everything out for 10 hours. And people are telling me that'll just be the start of it. These countries with high levels of renewables will end up with major blackouts because they don't have the spinning reserve that comes from coal and from nuclear.
Dick Smith, where did Peter Dutton go wrong?
Where did he look? I think.
Why do you think he lost? Overwhelmingly, he was seriously punted.
Yes, I don't really know. I think the only real difference was the nuclear policy, and people have been convinced by the CSIRO, and the Labor Party is completely convinced that we can run Australia completely on renewables and batteries. And until we know whether that's so or not, and the problem is if we keep putting in these windmills, which we're going to do, and then it doesn't work, it's too late to go nuclear. Nuclear would take at least 10 years to put in. So presumably we'll just end up with blackouts. And I remember when I was a kid in the 1950s in Roseville, we used to have regular blackouts at 3 o'clock or 4 o'clock in the afternoon. We'd be told there was a blackout. Well, we'll go back to that, I believe, and they'll say this will be in 10 or 15 years' time. Gee, what a pity we didn't go nuclear, or maybe we closed the coal down too early.
Are you optimistic about where Australia's headed?
Yeah, I'm pretty optimistic. By the way, let me explain to everyone, I am a believer in climate change. A lot of my right-wing friends believe that the climate is not being changed by humans putting carbon dioxide into the air. I've done as much research as I can, and most scientists believe that we are affecting the climate and we have to stop putting carbon dioxide into the air, and that's why I say we should move to nuclear. Am I optimistic? Well, yes, I'm concerned about the incredible population increase and the fact that young couples, when Pip and I, we bought our first house in 1972 in Greenwich. What's that, 10 minutes from the centre of Sydney. It cost $32,000, has a backyard and a front yard and beautiful trees. I think it was an $8,000 deposit, and we were just getting Dick Smith Electronics going, so we didn't have much money. So we were able to buy a house close to Sydney with a backyard, and the kids played in the yard, and it was just wonderful. Now, each generation should be better off, not worse off. But when it comes to housing affordability, we all know it's gone the opposite way. And that's what a government should be doing something about. The way of doing that would be to announce that we're going to substantially reduce immigration. And the Liberals did announce that we're going to bring it down to a certain amount, but maybe people didn't believe them. The problem is that the big developers who are powerful, the billionaires, just want more money. And they want more units. They're constantly calling for greater immigration because they want to be able to build more units so they can turn their 20 billion into 30 billion. And I don't understand the greed, but they're powerful politically. And so no political party has ever been able to get enough votes by saying that we have to reduce our population increase so people can afford houses and so young Australians can have a good future.
I'll tell you one more thing that I've been saying for years, and you tell me your response. And that's the fact that it wouldn't be much fun, but you can live without electricity. You can live without petrol and oil, but you cannot live without water. And I think we waste so much water. God, we use precious drinking water to flush our toilets. And we have so much water that falls during the wet season to the top half of Australia, and we don't harvest it. It rolls off the roofs, down the roads, into the ocean, most of it, unless you've got a rain tank. And the only way to get it back is through a desal plant, which costs an absolute fortune to run. And I've been saying that we need to spend on infrastructure. We need to build dams, harvest water, and then get it to where it's desperately needed, especially if our population is going to get close to 50 million over the next 40 years. And you said, you earlier in our chat, you mentioned the figure 1 billion. God, strike me pink. Imagine that. We're going to have to green Australia and water Australia. And I believe we waste water and we need to harvest it. Your response?
Yeah, the problem in bringing water, Bradfield had this plan of bringing water from Bradfield, who built the Harbour Bridge. He was a genius, bringing water from Queensland down into New South Wales. The problem is that normally you'd have to pipe it and you'd need pumps, and that would need an incredible amount of energy. That's a huge amount of energy. I would say by damming water up where you have the rainy season and you've got lots of rain in the tropics, and then bringing that water down to, say, Sydney and Melbourne would cost far more than desalinating salt water. I don't see a water problem because of desalination, and at the very end you just use nuclear power. We have the world's largest reserves of uranium. You use that to desalinate water, so you always have enough water for drinking. When it comes to water for growing food, the ABC is always talking about the Murray-Darling Basin, but that's pretty well using every bit of its water now with the population we have now. But if we double or triple the population, you're going to need double or triple the food, and that means double or triple the water, and that certainly isn't available in the Murray River. And so maybe then they'll have to start piping it from the north, but that will cost a tremendous amount of money.
But the geographical fact is that when it rains and rains and rains in the northern part of Australia, 8 months later, that water ends up in Lake Eyre. It does run down.
Yeah, it does. It definitely does. It evaporates tremendously on the side, but it ends up in Lake Eyre, which is a tremendous distance away from Sydney. You'd have to get it from Lake Eyre. Lake Eyre mainly is empty. It's just starting to fill at the moment because of the major floods they've had. But then you'd have to pump it from that. Lake Eyre is below sea level, so you'd have to pump the water from below the sea level over the Great Dividing Range to the cities, and that would be incredibly expensive. Look, anything's possible.
Hey, listen, they pipe gas.
Yep.
They pipe natural gas. I think water is way more important, but that's just my opinion.
Anyway, sounds a good idea, something that should be looked at without any doubt. But that wouldn't, if we stabilised our population at 30 million, if we reduced our immigration to about 80,000 a year, which is still pretty fantastic, and we ended up with 30 million, we could start to live in balance and people would be able to afford a house again. And I just think living in balance, you can't grow forever. And I tell my capitalistic mates, look, it's impossible to grow forever. It's a finite world. One day we have to stop growing. Let's have a plan. No, I mean, it's interesting, Luke, not one political party has a population plan. There was a Sustainable Population Party, hardly gets any votes. And so I tried to support people saying that you need to have a population plan, but generally speaking, I think 7 out of 10 Australians would agree with me, but no political party is game to take it up.
Dick Smith, it's been an absolute joy. Can you do me a favour? When you see Singo, can you please say good day to him for me and remind me to him? He'll know.
I will.
And can you please give him a hug because he lost his daughter Dawn in that terrible stabbing at the Westfield in Bondi. Just the most horrid story. She was a beautiful girl about to be married. So can you please pass on my sincere condolences and love and support?
I certainly will, without any doubt, Luke, and it's been wonderful to talk to you.
What advice have you got for young Australians who are feeling a bit desperate, who feel there's no hope of them ever owning a home in Australia? What's your words of encouragement and advice to finish off?
Well, my advice to young people is to ask advice and copy the success of others. And I think you read my book, My Adventurous Life, where I mentioned that. Ask advice, copy the success of others, and surround yourself with capable people. And there is potential. Look, house prices won't always be high. Naturally, people who own a house want them to be high. And fortunately, there are a lot of kids who are going to help from the mum and dad bank when they sell their house, so there's an advantage there. Generally speaking, the Prime Minister says we're the best country in the world, and I bet every leader says that about their country. But in this particular case, he's pretty right. I've been to 130 different countries, and we are the best country in the world. And if I was a young person, 15, 16, 17 years of age, I'd rather be in Australia than anywhere else in the world. I think that the future is going to be good. Yes, housing will be expensive, but one day I think it will come down in price. And otherwise, I think this is a wonderful country and there's a wonderful future. The fact that you can travel around the world so easily these days and young people do it, the fact that we can afford such good health care is wonderful in this country, and the fact that we have this wonderful democracy. There's only about 30 countries in the world that have a democracy, and what I couldn't get over was at this last election, the handover, when Peter Dutton got up and graciously handed over, he said, the Australian people have made their decision, and congratulations to Mr. Albanese. And then Anthony Albanese got up and thanked Peter Dutton. I thought, what a fantastic country this is, that we can change power. We'll keep the power the same way, but have an election with just no fear of anything going on like it did in the United States. That's where we're lucky.
I wanted to ask you about the Trump tariffs, but maybe we can do that and talk about other things next time we talk. I'll let you go. Please give my love and best wishes to Pip, as I mentioned, and to Singo. And Dick Smith, you are an inspiration, and thank you for giving us so much time. I've enjoyed it.
Wonderful, Luke. Great to be talking to you. I've enjoyed it greatly too.
Dick Smith. That's it. Thank you. Another episode. Is it up the stick or has been dropped in the ether somewhere? I don't know how it works. All I do is do what I'm told and sit here and gibber. And if you like the gibber, please share it. Please like it. And remember, thank you so much, Flip Connect, flipconnect.com.au and powerpollen.com.au. Take care.